theories and postmodern theories is that you feel like you can't live anymore. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm being manipulated by the culture industry, you know.
I took pop culture, and it was like whenever I required things,
Yeah.
like media, and like almost everything was critical theory, but it was like the record labels. There was one about Disney, and by the end of it, I was just like I liked Disney so much that I was just like, no, I'm just gonna reject it all. Like even if they have points, I'm not gonna listen to it. I'm just gonna reject it because I'm so sick of hearing it. Like
you have to.
You either like you reject it all, or you're just like.
You have to find a way to live, right? All right, so let's talk about critical theory. Hopefully you've got some other parts. I know when I was in graduate school, I read a lot of other books to try to understand what was going on, because in my graduate education, critical theory was just, the thing, because my professors were people who had graduated from their doctoral programs in the 60s and 70s. So they're primed up on this stuff. And I've tried to bring to you some of the postmodern issues of building community. We hit that at the comms a little bit, that it's fine to, like Derrida, to reject everything that's unified and rip it apart, or find the places where it doesn't fit well. But then what do you do? How do you live? How do you live with others in a humane community? So that becomes an issue. But you've got to understand critical theory in order to make sense of it. Now, the critical tradition does begin, as the book says, with Marx. And you read a little bit of Marx's writings. The way I've understood Marx is that he was driven to some degree by this awareness of injustice in the industrial society, so that you had children and women working, ungodly hours and in unsafe conditions and getting hurt and losing hands and fingers and then being thrown off the workforce because they couldn't work anymore. So Marx saw this huge injustice of people being taken advantage of by owners, people in power. And for Marx, a big question was, why in the world do millions of people let a few people do this to them? There's not like there are armed guards at every corner forcing them like they're in a prison to do this. Why do they put up with this? And his answer was they put up with it because they have an ideology that says some people are owners, some people are workers. Everyone has their station in life. My job is to be the best worker I can be. And he called that a false consciousness, or a hegemonic ideology, a set of ideas that rules. And his comment was that the ruling ideas of any time are the ideas of the ruling people. That the rulers set the agenda for the consciousness of people. And of course, media has only amplified that issue. So Marx was disturbed about this. Vulgar Marxism or simplistic Marxism said that the economics structured the whole of society. Neo-Marxists and small m Marxists say, no, there's a whole lot of other things going on that shape society, and economics is part of it, but there's a lot of other things that are involved. Now, to understand a critical theorist, you must also understand that Marx expected that society would move from capitalism to a social collectivist, let's call it collectivist, a collectivist society. And that this would be a natural progression. That this historically, Marx was a historical materialist. He believed that there was an inevitable progress to human history, and it would move inevitably to this collectivist state, because this was so unbearable and so unjust that people would never put up with it, that the capitalism would ripen and then rot. And so a big problem for critical theorists has been, what happened? Why didn't this happen? And their answer traditionally to that is that it didn't happen because media came along. Mass media came along and enabled the rulers to, it gave them a tool to just continue this huge perpetuation of a false consciousness in people. And so we have to be highly critical of the media in order to liberate, emancipate people, so that the natural historical progression of a collectivist society can emerge, or democratic. I mean, you can look at this as democratic also, where in a real democratic state, everybody is involved. Not like we talk about, we live in the United States as a republic, because we elect representatives who then make decisions. We are not a brute democracy. I mean, we have democratic parts, but we don't operate quite that way. And so the goal of a collectivist or democratic society where everybody participates, Jeff and I were talking that it's emancipated, so that everybody is free to become their self, their authentic self, and to, they're not kept from emerging, and that they are egalitarian, that there is a level playing field between people. So these are the values that guide a critical theorist. So, for instance, I was just doing this in the class before here. This is agenda setting theory of Max McCombs, which I think we may have looked at in another setting. But Max McCombs could be considered somewhat of a critical theory, in that it looks at the media and says the media has a huge force in shaping public opinion. And there are very few people who set the agenda for the media. So for instance, the way you look at it is, in a given day, how many things happen? 4,682, right? No, I mean, a million things happen, an infinite number of things happen. Now, out of all of that stuff that happens, certain things get selected to be reported on in the media, right? So out of the 400 million things that happened today, 8 of them got picked. The Obama-Clinton thing, the deaths in Iraq, the so forth and so on. And so those things get disseminated through the media. I'm using that word not in the way Dietz, is it Dietz or who is it uses that word? But I'm using that in terms of broadcasting it. So those 8 things get pumped through the media outlets. So they appear on the news, they appear in your Time and Newsweek, they appear in the New York Times. And so people then start to talk about those things. Those become the things that we talk about when we were with our friends. Oh, did you read the story about this and that and the other thing? Or, oh, the war is going really bad. Did you see there were 8 people killed today in roadside bombings? That's what we say to each other. And the things that then become our agenda shape a number of things. If I were to ask you today, what are the 8 things that you're thinking about? Those things then shape your voting choices. They shape the way you use your money. They shape your employment choices. So this has a huge impact. And McCombs and his people working on this project did a study to ask the question, does the public's agenda set the media agenda, or does the media agenda set the public agenda? You know, which comes first? Who's setting what causes what? I mean, one way to think of this is you could say, well, this is what people are thinking about, so this is what the news reports on, right? So a research model, let's just push this a little bit into research methods. What would you have to demonstrate in order to answer that question?
I think you would have to interview viewers to find out if they were interested in that topic beforehand, or if because the media reported on it that they're interested.
All right, you got to find out which comes first.
Oh, I was gonna say, maybe interview people who are like high, like media consumers and people who are low media consumers, and see if they have the same, interests. Like
Okay.
people who are all high media consumers all say the same answers. The people who really don't consume that much media give you different answers.
All right. Research has done two things with this. One of the things they have shown is that there's a very high correlation between the media agenda and the public agenda. If you go around and ask people, what are you thinking about? And then you do a content analysis of the media, where you measure column inches of stories and placement in the paper and what gets reported first, you'll find a very high correlation between what we're thinking about and what the media is reporting. You also find out, if you do a careful read, that people's attitudes lag the media agenda. So they've done this. They've worked on a experiment that would, hypothesis that would demonstrate this. And it is the case that the public agenda follows the media agenda. So then you ask the question, well, all these things that happen, these 4,800 things that happened today, there are things like Darfur and Rwanda and other things in other places that are going on and happening, but are not hitting the media. And they're
Britney Spears instead.
Yeah, and we get Britney Spears instead, and this week she ran a red light, and so what are we going to do? So, oh my gosh, and why am I wasting brain cells on this, But there are things like Rwanda and Darfur, and that there are some people who try to call attention to, and we go, you're weird, Well, why do we say that? Because our agenda has been set by the media. And that's not in the media agenda, so you're weird if you're bringing up Rwanda. Now, that's not important. Obviously, if it was important, it would be in the news. Critical theorist says, no.
It doesn't depend here on the type of media you
Yeah. Right.
choose.
Yeah, in Max McComb's time, when they were doing this research, there was not broadcast cable. There was not cable, so people didn't have so many opportunities to self-select media. But this was in a time when there was more limited broadcast media. But nonetheless, it holds for print media like Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and Report, and other outlets that we have. So the question becomes, well, who makes these choices? And in whose interests are these choices made? And it turns out that, at least in Max McComb's time, there were about 8 people. He could identify 8 people who are the bureau chiefs of ABC, Reuters, News Service, so forth and so on. He said, and these people all hang out together. They go to parties together, they go to meals together, they go to cultural events together. And so there's this huge power in these people to shape what the public agenda is. Now that's disturbing to someone who wants to talk about an emancipated, egalitarian, democratic society. Because we're going around thinking we know what's going on. I'm up on the news. I know what's going on. Well, you don't know what's going on. You know what the outlets have set you with an agenda. So you have a false consciousness. You think you know, but you don't really know. And the consciousness you have is shaped by someone else for their interests, not your interests.
Has there been any research as to how we could get outside of that mold? Just how we could get out of the cycle, as opposed to just bringing it to intention?
Well, the core part of critical theory is that we must conscientize people. We have to make people aware of these processes, which is the first part of their liberation from being caught up in it. Because once you realize it, then you start looking for new media. Or you start saying, it's not stupid to talk about Darfur just because it's not on the news. It's something I should pay attention to. Now, since McComb's time, media have proliferated, you know, in terms of the ability of people to use alternate sources. So like you can go on Google News, for instance, and you can look at stories from Saudi Arabia, Italy, you know, you can choose a whole bunch of news. Now, you know, Ben's article makes us ask, even there, you know, has there been selection? Or is it a truly democratic process where any given article has an opportunity to appear? Any given voice has an opportunity to appear. I don't know the answer to that, how they do their... But see, that's the problem of the news services. Again, funnel things down into someone chooses which stories. So cultivation theory says that heavy television viewers think the world is more scary than it is. So again, you get a couple of Iraq roadside bomb stories, you get a couple of kids shooting a school in this place, you get a couple of 8-year-olds in Georgia assaulting a girl, you know, and then you think, oh my God, the world is going, you know, to heck, when that's a selection of 4 events out of 400,000, you know, now we think we know what's going on in the world.
Yeah, someone mentioned to me once, I don't know what channel it was, tried to do some kind of thing where they were reporting as much good news as they did bad news, and they found the public didn't want it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like 4 months or something.
Yeah,
like that.
something like that.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
they stopped doing it.
Yep, yep,
Because
yep.
the ratings didn't support it.
Yes, yeah. Well, and you know, if we think now as communication theorists about the formation of self, the formation of consciousness, you know, how have we been formed, and what shaped us that way, that we want these things.
But now, would that support the idea that it's also kind of the public setting the agenda for the media in a small way?
What, that the good news thing?
Well, no, that they're rejecting something that the media is putting out there.
Perhaps.
Maybe just that one.
Yeah, see, I think some critical theorists would say that was just that really wasn't an honest experiment. It was already appropriated by the machine. You know, it was already part of the false consciousness thing. So this is the question of appropriation. That anything that it said in our readings, you know, that anything that is unique and individual, and it gets a talent scout. I think it was the culture industry was saying that a talent scout finds it and commodifies it, turns it into something that now it fits. You know, I know my son used to be, you know, when he was in high school or whatever, Nirvana was the big business, you know, and he was like, oh, you know, they're real, you know, they're not sold out to the companies, the record companies and all, you know, and then they got appropriated. And all of a sudden they were T-shirts and they were this and that, you know. Punk was that way too, punk style. It started out as a individual thing. You made your clothes, and then all of a sudden you could go buy clothes that looked like you made them. Right? So it's a commodification, an appropriation of what tried to get away from the culture industry and this capital, buy into the capital consumer mentality thing, where you work more efficiently so that you can buy more things, have efficient leisure time so that you can buy more things, and you're just buying and buying and buying and working, and someone somewhere is just sitting around raking in the money, and you're serving them, their interests.
I was just gonna say, those clothes are now more expensive, the ones
Are
that
they?
like you've been.
Yeah, so critical theorists love this. They're like, yeah, you know, it's just so much what they talk about. But this is a case where communication theorists get into a critical mode. And so if you're a socio-psychological person, you might study how does media shape people's attitudes, you know, and you would do measurements of their attitudes about this, that, and the other thing, and you do surveys, but you're working within the system. A critical theorist says you're not thinking big enough. Why are you doing that research? What does it accomplish? You're still appropriated by the false consciousness that's not in your own interests. So that research is totally a waste of your time and energy. You know, so they would say that any research that is not emancipatory or that tries to free people from their false consciousnesses is already been appropriated and is serving just to reinforce and reproduce the existing structures of oppression or of ideological blindness that we have. So like you say, Ben, you know, you get into these articles, these people start to get hot. They start to get, you know, they're angry in these articles because they see this going on, but see where they get criticized by postmodern or people or modernists. We'll talk a little bit about Habermas as a modernist, you know, where often these people are postmodernists, which means you reject a grand narrative. I think it's Baudrillard, you know, or Lyotard. You reject a grand meta-narrative, you know, that everything is progressing towards this historical function, you know. But that's what they do. They're really modernists. Critical theorists are modernists, or else they have to give an account. Why do you have such a strong value when you don't believe that, when you believe all values are culturally formed?
So, across time, like in the 50s, everyone dressed a certain way. In the 60s, everyone dressed a certain way. I think now everyone acts more as an individual than they did previously. But according to critical theory, they would say that I'm just buying into what they want me to believe, right?
Yes. Stuart Hall, for instance. Stuart Hall is a name in cultural studies. Let's talk about cultural studies for a little bit. You know, he says that the media maintains the dominance of this system, and popular culture is continually reappropriated by this process. So even what we think of as being individual is still within the system. So all the students drinking at Penn State, for instance, your article about Penn State, these students, some may choose to drink more, some may choose to drink less, but nobody challenges the whole concept of going to college, being in a fraternity, and that's part of the culture. Nobody challenges that. We just adjust it a little bit.
And those who do are on the outside.
Right, and those who challenge it are like, you know, you guys are crazy, you know, or something. But because you're not in the system, you're not in the flow of it. And yeah, so a critical theorist wants that to be different, wants you to think differently. I'm thinking about magazines and feminism for a minute here too. One of the ways this works out is, for instance, fashion magazines and magazines that show you what you should look like and what you should wear and all this stuff. You can see them on the one hand as an instrument of capitalism, that you have to buy these things and go to the gym and look this way and do all this stuff. So now you are being, you think this is what you want, but it's not in your own interests. So that's one of the things they want people to wake up to. Now, there's another way that a feminist would look at that to say, well, I can appropriate that image. I can still do these things, but I do them in a way where I understand that this is the case, and I may choose to live in that, but I live in it with a freedom to change it and to not let it run my life. So this is called a playful appropriation of the media, where you kind of play with it because you know what it's trying to do, and now you can still cooperate with it, because like your Penn State guy, you got some guy who stands on the library steps with a bullhorn saying you're all capitalist, subject slaves, and you need to escape from this ideology, and you go like, yeah, go away, So that's not all necessarily effective. But if people can live into this and then not be run by it, that's another way to be a critical person in the setting. You can choose. See, the problem with false consciousness is these people have never chosen this. It just got chosen for them, so to speak. Choosed for them. It was chosen, it was set for them. Ben?
Has that proven to be a lot more effective?
The playful appropriation?
Yeah,
I'm not an expert on this, but it's a whole direction that feminism has gone, because the rejection of some of those feminine models didn't prove very effective for a lot of different reasons. So then the question became, well, can we appropriate them still, but in a different way, where we can choose or not choose things?
Right. I mean, a lot of this just seems like, and I read through a lot of it, but it seems like, I don't know if any of you saw this latest, I guess it was like the Superman movie or whatever, when he's like, he flies above the world and he hears all the people, and he sees what's wrong with the world, and he's like the one who sort of, he's right, and a lot of people are wrong, but he's up there by himself. So it's like... Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's where this playful appropriation thing has gone. It's kind of a third or fourth wave of feminism. I don't know. I can't, I'm not an expert on feminism. But, you had your first wave, which was voter rights, and your second wave, which was your emancipation kind of a thing. And then there's kind of these new waves that have come along and said, well, we don't have to reject everything here. We can live in it and work with and use it to our advantage. So that's a whole other approach to this. Go ahead, Jeff.
A friend of mine, I didn't get to pursue it, but she was, I was talking about, we had touched on feminist theory in here, and she was saying, well, it's really about the questions that get asked. It goes back to that. Mm-hmm. And then our conversation ended, and I just wondered if that resonates for you in some way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, these are the questions. Does anybody down here ask, why, out of all of the 400,000 things that happen in a day, are these 5 chosen? That's a question. It's about the questions you ask. Right. Do I really need to look like this model? Do I need to have this thing? Who says I need to have this thing? Who will benefit if I purchase this thing? Will it make me a more emancipated person if I purchase this thing? Or will it mean that now I have this thing I have to be careful about and I have to work harder to pay for it? So how does that work? Is that what I want? But if you never ask those questions, you just think, oh my gosh, I got to have that thing, and then... So yeah, it's a lot of it is learning to ask critical questions. Not critical in the sense of I don't like your shoes, but critical in the sense.
So is it like the progeny of, is feminism the progeny of Marxism in that regard? That, it seems like the same things are kind of going on there about like, well, how did we get this message? And
I don't know. Here's what I want to say. Maybe you can.
No, does critical theory, would they look at the order also, which each one of the segues were in the news? Yes. And then why they end on a happy note? Like, they'll talk about the worst thing usually right before, and then the last segment before the news ends, it's like they rescued a cat out of a tree.
Right. Yeah, I think a critical theorist would say that's a strategic way to numb you from getting to the point where you think, wait a minute, holy man, you know. So it
Like,
subverts
if the things
your
that,
critical
like, I don't
instinct.
think it's like that big of a big a video they forward at the end, because if you have breaking news that comes in, or like if you run over time, that's the end of the show.
Yeah.
Like sports is the last to be cut. Like
Yeah, I have no clue these days what's going on in news programming. It's highly entertainment focused, you know, and Max McComb, he rated things on the basis of which came first, which came second, which came third.